10 Scariest Archaeological Discoveries. Archaeological discoveries are essential as they show us how our ancestors lived and expose some hidden mysteries of our world. Archaeologists typically find treasures or items belonging to ancient civilizations, but sometimes some archaeological discoveries are scary and even have scarier stories. Many discoveries hold deep, dark tales, from heads on spikes to demonic jars. In our video today, we explore some of these scary archaeological findings. Some of the discoveries on our list are very scary, so brace yourselves. We begin from number 10. Don't skip any one of them, as they are terrifying in different ways, the next being more frightening than the last. Number 10. Chinese pits full of heads. A massive walled city capped with a stepped pyramid was recently discovered in China in Shimao. It was initially misidentified as part of the historic Great Wall. The huge pyramid, which consisted of 11 different platforms, was just one element of this Bronze Age complex, erected over at least 6 pits filled with severed human heads as a construction sacrifice. The Shimao site is located along a Yellow River branch known as the Northern Zone, which was supposed to be a meeting place between the Central Plains and the steppe. Because of the more well-known history of the Great Wall, which defined the biological and cultural border between China and Inner Asia, the ancient peoples who lived north of this enormous first millennium BC barrier were considered barbarians. Quote, 6 holes containing severed human heads have been uncovered at the outer gateway of the eastern entrance on the outer rampart alone, the researchers say. They believe that the jade artifacts and the human sacrifices, all of whom were young ladies, undoubtedly endowed Shimao with ritual and spiritual power. It is unknown what occurred to Shimao, causing it to be abandoned and fall to ruin. However, archaeological investigations are underway, so scholars expect to discover more about this fascinating early Chinese society soon. I wonder if their rituals worked. Number 9. Underground Labyrinth of Death. Archaeologists digging at Chavin de Huantar in Peru uncovered a network of 35 interconnected underground tunnels containing the bodies of at least 3 men who may have been sacrificed in, quote, rituals including narcotics, noise, and light manipulation, using tiny remote-controlled robots. Stanford University engineers created the robots, miniature cars equipped with cameras and a lighting system controlled remotely. According to the archaeological team, the wheeled robots discovered ceramic pieces, tools, and human skeletal bones. In addition, 35 interconnected underground tunnels spanning from 1200 to 200 years BC have been found on the Chavin de Huantar temple complex. John Rick, the project's director and a Stanford University archaeologist, stated, quote, at least 3 individuals have been recovered in one of the galleries. One is a tiny kid, another is an adolescent, and the third is a young man between the ages of 20 and 30. Authorities and priests messed with the building and performed rituals with drugs, noise, and light manipulation that pilgrims couldn't understand, leading them to think Chavin's authorities had great powers. Can you imagine how many people are buried in this labyrinth? Number 8. Civil War Massacre. An endeavor to enlarge Durham University's library in northeast England resulted in discovering 17th century anguish and misery. Archaeologists excavating ahead of development unearthed 2 mass graves containing 1,700 bones from the mid-1600s. The skeletons are most likely the remains of Scottish prisoners of war captured during the Third English Civil War, a conflict between parliamentarians commanded by Oliver Cromwell and royalists loyal to King Charles II. The remains belong to guys aged 13 to 25, implying that they were military personnel. They showed no trauma and most likely died of illness while incarcerated, only to be buried in nameless mass graves. Quote, these are regular Scots Army troops, presumably raised from the lowlands of Scotland, some Highlanders, and up into the northeast of Scotland, whose names we don't know, said Pam Graves, a senior lecturer at Durham University. We know the names of modern officers, but we seldom remember the names of common troops. So sad. Young men left to die. Number 7. Cannibal expedition. Sir John Franklin and his crew set off on their Arctic voyage in 1845, hoping to find the Northwest Passage. They almost definitely did not anticipate turning to cannibalism in a matter of years. The two ships of the Franklin expedition, the HMS Terror and the HMS Erebus, got stuck in ice, which refused to thaw season after season. By April 1848, 24 men had perished, and the surviving crew embarked on a journey to the next trade station. Nobody ever heard from them again. Some of the crew members' bones were discovered over time. Researchers believe the bones were cut, cooked, and broken to get the marrow. Quote, "The revelation reflects the dire position in which those men found themselves." Can you imagine cooking your mate? Number 6. Burke and Hare dolls. In the 19th century, Edinburgh, Scotland was a renowned center of anatomical study, but this resulted in a scarcity of cadavers for students to study. William Burke and William Hare recognized an opportunity to profit from an increasing demand for corpses. In 1828, the duo sold 17 corpses to Robert Knox, an anatomist who dissected bodies during his lectures. Their first sale was the body of a hotel renter who died of edema, a disorder that causes the body to enlarge. Burke and Hare murdered 16 individuals and shared the proceeds after understanding how much money they could make from each body. They were finally apprehended. Hare was granted immunity in return for his testimony, allowing him to escape jail time. Burke, on the other hand, was hung for his crimes. But the bizarre story didn't end there. A group of lads playing in a park in 1836 discovered a curious collection of 17 dolls. They were placed into a hole on a mountainside in tiny coffins. At first, people suspected the dolls were toys or had to do with witchcraft. However, many people noticed similarities between the dolls and Burke and Hare's victims and felt a link. Modern scientists undertook DNA tests to try and see if they could show that the murderers made the dolls, but the findings were inconclusive. Nonetheless, many academics believe the dolls had something to do with the killings. According to one interpretation, Burke created the dolls to assuage his guilty conscience. 8 of the dolls have survived and are on exhibit at the National Museum of Scotland, where they serve as a fascinating historical puzzle. I wonder what became of William Hare. Number 5. Demonic Jar. Archaeologists were excavating a Neolithic farmhouse in Poland, where they discovered a 7,000-year-old jar fragment shaped like a human face with horns. The team does not know what the image portrayed on the jar represents, but they believe it may have had spiritual or religious importance to the people who constructed and utilized it. Similar artifacts have been recovered further south, but this is the first time an artifact of this type has been discovered in Poland, leading scientists to conclude that the prehistoric peasants had contact with people living in Hungary and Slovakia. The jar is constructed of obsidian, which was not found locally, implying that it was imported. The people who resided there belonged to the linear pottery culture. They existed in Europe from 5500 to 4500 BC and were notable for their unusual ceramic decoration. There are 6 longhouses in the community, each about 36 feet or 11 meters long, and pits filled with shattered pottery and flint artifacts. It remains to be seen whether the ongoing study will reveal the purpose behind the demonic-looking jar. What do you think they might have been used for? Storing souls? Number 4. Heads on spikes. Construction workers in Sweden were given the shock of a lifetime when they discovered some smashed skulls in a peat bog. The bones date back to the Stone Age, and there was a lot more to this disturbing discovery than meets the eye. When a new railway line was built for freight trains passing through the area, construction workers uncovered the grisly remains and called in the archaeologists. They discovered smashed heads and heads on skewers, fragments from animals, and tools made of bone and horn. The human heads found were skewered on some poles, and a pile of rocks reminded them of Ivan the Terrible. But this place used to be a pond, and over time, the pond turned into a peat marsh. According to Frederick Holgren, the excavation's project leader, All indicators point to some bizarre ceremonial activity with the Stone Age people. These skulls were separated from the bodies, spiked, and then buried with great care. Archaeologists discovered the skulls of 10 people in the boggy sediment, marking the first evidence of Mesolithic hunter-gatherers mounting human skulls on stakes. Some of these skulls showed signs of trauma, but the injuries showed signs of healing after being hit in the head. It is unclear how their heads ended up on stakes. Swedish forensic scientists are working on reconstructing the faces and clothing of some of these people to see what they might have looked like so long ago. Even stranger, the bodies were buried beneath a burial mound, which they didn't use in Sweden until much later in the Iron Age, then only until the end of the Viking era. Nobody can understand why these Stone Age citizens, who were likely hunters and gatherers, had gone to all the trouble of creating a burial mound. So, why do you think they did it? Number 3. The Black Sarcophagus. The July 2018 discovery of a large 2,000-year-old sealed black granite sarcophagus in Alexandria, Egypt, sparked concerns that opening it might unleash a world-ending curse. When the casket was opened, it was discovered to contain the remains of 3 Egyptian army commanders and reddish-brown sewage sludge, giving rise to the sarcophagus juice meme. The ministry's photos show the sarcophagus filled with liquid sewage, which must have leaked in at some time. However, the analysis of the skeletal remains is still underway. Still, preliminary findings indicate that an arrow struck one of the victims discovered in the sarcophagus. Yet, no inscriptions or pieces of art have been discovered outside or inside the sarcophagus. According to the experts, it's also unknown what objects, if any, was buried alongside the remains. When the coffin was being excavated, an alabaster head of a man was discovered nearby. I wonder what it was doing there. Number 2. Polish vampire burials. The actual narrative of Eastern European vampires is arguably creepier than Dracula's mythical legends. Some persons in Poland were buried with sickles around their necks or boulders jammed under their chins between the 1600s and 1700s. These measures were made to prevent the deceased from resurrecting as vampires, who, according to locals, would drain the blood of friends and relatives. Researchers discovered in 2014 that the vampire graves in Poland's Drosko cemetery were the bodies of people who had not died of trauma. According to experts, they were most likely the victims of a cholera outbreak, which would have killed them quickly. Do you think there were vampires in Poland? Number 1. Ancient chemical warfare. Ancient battles were grim, but a squad of 20 or so Roman troops may have died in a particularly gruesome manner about 2,000 years ago. During a siege of the Roman-held Syrian city of Dura, Persian warriors constructed tunnels beneath the city walls to weaken them. In retaliation, the Romans dug their tunnels to intercept the Persians. The Persians, however, saw them coming, and according to some archaeologists, planned a horrific trap. A cloud of poisonous petrochemical smoke that would have converted the Romans' lungs to acid. The tunnels were discovered in the 1920s and 1930s and have since been reburied. However, some modern archaeologists believe the positioning of the skeletons and the presence of sulfur and bitumen crystals indicates chemical warfare. This strangling gas would have been like hell's fumes. This is probably the earliest form of chemical warfare. Smart, right? And if you enjoyed this video, we have another like it of the world's scariest archaeological discoveries ever found in ice that I'm sure you will enjoy watching.